Welcome to another live edition of Locked On 49ers. We're digging into some ESPN stat projections for the 2023 Niners, looking at the offensive side of the ball this week. Defense last week. You can go check that out if you want on our older podcast. But we're going stat projections, 49ers, offensive side of the ball today. Christian McCaffrey, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Aiyuk, George Kittle, Brock Purdy, all of them coming up right now.
You are Locked On 49ers, your daily San Francisco 49ers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On 49ers. Brian Peacock and Eric Crocker at BD Peacock at Eric_Crocker. Thanks everybody for making us your first listen on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On 49ers is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, Croc, let's get into this offensive side of the football here. Rick Torres in the chat, pumped up. Let's go, baby. I like it. Feel free to hit us with any questions in the chat about these projections. We had a fun time doing the defensive side of the ball, and I think we're going to have even more fun looking at offense. And these projections coming from Mike Clay of ESPN. And, of course, quarterback is all the talk with the 49ers, so we got to start there, Croc. And to be honest with you, I think we're going to have some problems, and I think we'll project things a little differently than they do here on ESPN with some of the other skill players on offense for the 49ers and those stats this year. I thought I did a really good job with the quarterbacks, even just with the game distribution. Brock Purdy, 14 projected games. Trey Lance, 2 projected games. Sam Darnold, 1 projected game. And I think the least likely scenario of all of them is that none of the 3 quarterbacks or any of the 3 quarterbacks don't play a game. I just feel like it has to happen, right?
Yeah, and I think the more interesting thing for me to see right away is they're projecting a fairly efficient Trey Lance.
I mean, I would project that too. He's only got 2 games here, 40 completions, 61 attempts, 447 yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions for Trey Lance in his 2 games projected there. So it's really hard to project. And really, they're kind of projecting out the 49ers offense. And to be honest with you, it looks like Darnold and Lance, and to be honest with you, Purdy aren't that far off. So I don't think they're projecting much of a difference between the 3 quarterbacks, no matter who plays, which is interesting.
Yeah, 3,200 yards from Brock Purdy. Right now, if you had to take the over-under on that, would you take the over? I feel like the over. Now, again, they're projecting that he misses 3 games. But even with the 3 games, we're still playing 14 games. It's not like the 16-game season before. You got 17 games now. So 14 games.
So that's 230, almost 232 yards per game passing.
That's a decent
3,245 over 14 games for Brock Purdy. And then considering he's not even cleared yet, I don't think I would touch it. And I certainly wouldn't bet on the over for Brock Purdy passing yards.
Wouldn't right now be the time to hit the over if he's not cleared yet? And obviously, depending on how much money you're putting on it. But is there a chance that if he's cleared in a month from today, he's fully cleared, ready to go, that number goes up? So, like, if you want the best value at it, you might want to jump in on it now.
Well, see, here's the thing. So you don't know when he's going to play his first game. And are you going to bet that Brock Purdy plays 17 games and doesn't get another injury? He's been injured twice in 8 games already. Trey Lance lasted not even 2 games last year. So, I mean, like, it's hard for me to project any of these quarterbacks playing even 14 games, to be honest.
What are your thoughts on Brock Purdy's stats outside of the yards and attempts? You see 20 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, and you see how well he played in the games last year, threw a bunch of touchdowns. His touchdown to interception ratio was tremendous. And looking at the projections that they have here, It doesn't quite reflect how well he played last season.
The projections are a little muted compared to what he did in his small sample. Because if you put what he did over the course of the regular season that he played, I mean, you'd be talking 30 touchdowns instead of 20. You'd be talking 4,000 yards instead of 3,200, over the course of 17 games. But I do think efficiency will very likely drop in a full season for Brock Purdy. It almost has to. Everything was perfect last year. It wasn't perfect with the way he played, but it was everything around him was nearly perfect, So because then, Deebo gets hurt, or Kittle gets hurt, or Christian McCaffrey gets hurt. That's going to hurt Brock Purdy's numbers as well. So there's a lot of, and by the way, getting to Christian McCaffrey, 14 games. I don't want to get to his projections yet, but projecting Purdy lose. Let's say Purdy misses. Let's say the games projections are all perfect on this. So Purdy misses 3 games. McCaffrey misses 3 games. Deebo misses 3 games. Are those games all at the same time? Are those games separate? So none of, all of them are on the field together for 9 games. So you can see how things could really change depending on who's on the field. And they were all in the field for Brock Purdy late in the season. Nobody had seen him yet. So when defenses get a chance to break down the tape, watch him, game plan for these 49ers, I expect the offense to do really well. But I do think efficiency numbers will come down for some of Brock Purdy's. Even if Brock Purdy, I've said this before, Brock Purdy could improve and his numbers still aren't as efficient as they were last year because of how crazy it was.
He did play one game without Deebo Samuel. I believe it was against the Raiders. So we have seen that one time. And again, there was an interception in that game, some other weird stuff that happened. But overall, I thought he played extremely well, especially down the stretch. Had some things go his way with a fluttered ball that looked in trouble. It's like he got hit while throwing, and it was a little weird. Then Brandon Aiyuk, I think it was, made like an amazing catch. But my thing is, who is most important for him to have the level of success that he had last year, outside of Kyle Shanahan, of course? But we're looking at these guys that potentially might miss some games, and definitely go straight to the running back. At least I do, because that's the one that's most likely to just get banged up, just based on what you see around the league. Is Christian McCaffrey? How big of a loss would that be for Brock Purdy and his efficiency?
I think it would be a big. I think it'd be huge for the quarterback, and it would be not a huge deal for the running game.
Right.
I think losing McCaffrey is huge for the efficiency, for having that outlet, for what Kyle Shanahan can do to scheme things up and get guys open. And we saw how well Kittle looked as well. So I would probably put Kittle and McCaffrey is more important than the outside guys for Brock Purdy, just watching how they played. Brock Purdy's really good in the red zone too.
Yeah. I think it's his ability to be able to play off script down there.
By the way, Croc, you're a married man. I'm a married man. Brock Purdy now engaged. I saw that on social media. Congratulations to young Brock Purdy and his future bride. I don't know. That can weigh on a man. That can change things. So you start bringing in kids into the situation. And
how old were you when you got married?
I was 30.
Okay, I was 28.
Okay,
I could not imagine being married at 23.
No, I can't. I've said this before too with NFL players, professional athletes. There's no way in hell I would have been at 23 prepared enough to be a professional, anything, right? Like I was like still kind of going to school. I was playing in bands. I was, kind of bartending and things like that. I wasn't ready to be like a 9-to-5 guy, put a suit on every day. I wasn't ready to be a professional, anything. And so, and definitely not getting married. So it takes, I waited a while. I waited a while to get married. I waited a while to have kids until I thought I was beyond ready.
I would say the one thing that's going to definitely help him, one, unlike Eric Crocker at the age of 23, he has a good job.
Yeah, he got a good job. It'll be a lot easier to find help for raising that child for sure.
But also, I do think just me being married now and understanding everything that goes into it, it does bring you a certain level of stability, right? Like once you make that commitment, as compared to bachelor 22, 23, 24-year-old Eric Crocker and what that looked like, he's probably better suited to be kind of more grounded, I guess you could say. Like if I was mature enough to be this version of myself at that age with my wife and the way our marriage is, I think that I would have been more focused on what my job was at that time. And I think that's where Brock Purdy is now, where, all right, I got my lady, we're getting married. The outside distractions, like now it's me and you always have that person to lean on to make sure that you're heading in the right direction. And that's what my wife is for me now. And hopefully that's what his fiance is for him moving forward. So I think that it'll be a good thing.
Be grounding for him. And he walked into the league acting like a professional. And it's, even for pro athletes that are getting prepared for this line of work, it's pretty rare to roll in and be that prepared. We saw it with Bosa. We saw it with Purdy. We saw it with guys like DeForest Buckner. There's been a few others, but rare is to be like, okay, this guy's acts like a 5-year veteran already in his rookie season. And Purdy did that. Okay, more with the stat projections from ESPN. Christian McCaffrey, the running game, the receiving game as well, coming up on Locked On 49ers. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. I mean, it's so important no matter what your small business is, whether you have an NFL team. Kyle Shanahan's superpower is finding the right people to be his assistants on his coaching staff, right? And so you have to be that for your small business. And when you're hiring, you got to find the right people. So super easy. It's the place where job seekers already are. I'm on LinkedIn. You're on LinkedIn. Everyone's already on LinkedIn. So you go to your profile, add your job to the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile, spreading the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on the candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and eventually hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Do you agree with 14 games? Would you take the over-under on 14 games for Christian McCaffrey?
Ooh, I take the under. Now, with the under, that means that you also get that 14th game. So if it lands on 14, then it pushes. So I take that as opposed to trying to take the over, and now he has to actually play 15 games, and that's kind of rough.
And it's kind of going back to what you said with Purdy. If we heard right now that Purdy was cleared, it was going to start week 1, I'd be like, yeah, give me the over on 3,200 passing yards, right? Like, I think it's pretty easy. And with McCaffrey, I would probably take the over, even with 14 games with these projections. These feel a little light, Croc. What do you think about 800 rushing yards in 14 games? Like, I'm sure people listening right now were thinking we're going to say something like 1,000 rushing and receiving, right? They've got 850 and 550 rushing and receiving for Christian McCaffrey, and that's 14 games. When I first saw this, I was like, oh, how many games are they projecting? I thought it would sound more like 12 games. No, or 10 games. 14 games. That's 61 yards per game rushing in those 14 games.
Kyle Shanahan has a tendency to kind of run guys into the ground. But if you told me that I'm guaranteed going to get 14 games out of McCaffrey, he will run for over 1,000 yards. No doubt. I would take the over on that all day. Yeah,
no doubt in my mind. And he might still get 1,000 receiving as well. 554 receiving, 70 receptions. I think he'll blow both of those away. Like, I would take the big over on all of these, even not knowing, even knowing a running back could get hurt and he might not even play 14 games, right? It's just that's the way it is for running backs. And he played 20 games last year. He might have missed a game. He missed a game with Carolina, didn't he?
I feel like he played every game.
And he didn't play a ton of snaps in the first game with the Niners, but he jumped right in there. But anyway, he played a lot of football games last year. And so 40 games over 2 seasons, if the Niners get back deep into the playoffs, that is tough for an NFL running back. And so,
especially a guy who had been coming off of back-to-back years, not the most healthy guy.
And he was banged up. He was banged up to end the year last year, but he gutted through it. And that was one of the most impressive things I saw from McCaffrey we knew how talented he was. We knew he's a good receiver. He's a good running back. Great player. But like the extra that he brought, the leadership, and just like the determination, it was like, dude, this guy's fun to watch. He does not it means something to him. I was kind of blown away by that with Christian McCaffrey. Like this dude wants every stinking yard, and it made it even more fun to watch.
Definitely. We talked a lot about that, the value of the running back, and I think he kind of proved to both of us how valuable he could be. Now, your stance was, okay, he's got to stay healthy, and they did give up a decent amount for him. But if he's on the field, we definitely know how Kyle plans on utilizing him, his impact, just how important I feel like he is to Brock Purdy in the development of his quarterback, having that check down guy, how efficient he was throwing the ball to Christian McCaffrey, the playmaking ability, how strong he runs. Man, I mean, he's only 26 though, and it feels like he's been in the league for 10 years. But as long as he's healthy, I think he's going to be tremendous. I think the one that is more questionable is probably behind him, and they have Elijah Mitchell projected to play 14 games. And if Mitchell plays 14 games, that is a huge win for the 49ers. Huge.
Oh, dude. Yeah. If I could take, and the only player on offense projected to play all 17 games is Kyle Juszczyk. And for a fullback, he's been kind of an Iron Man and kind of doesn't really get talked about for the 49ers. Especially with the beat. I mean, he's not a battering ram like old school fullbacks were, but you take a beating as an NFL fullback. If you could guarantee me right now 14 games from McCaffrey, 14 from Mitchell, 17 from Juszczyk, 13 and 14 from Jordan Mason and Ty Davis Price, but just basically the 28 combined games from McCaffrey and Mitchell. I mean, give me that all day long. The Niners will be set at running back if they get that.
And that's why 49ers are projected to have one of the best running back groups in the league. Like, that's how they're viewed.
So in Elijah Mitchell's 14 games, and they're projecting a little bit of a timeshare, not quite a committee, but only a couple hundred less yards for Elijah Mitchell. So they're projecting, quite a few carries, 39 less carries than McCaffrey in those 14 games. So 188 carries for McCaffrey was the projection, 854 yards, 151 carries projected for Elijah Mitchell, and 657 rushing yards. I'm going to do the math on what that yards per carry is right now. But the thing that's different is only 82 receiving yards. And one thing that I hope happens for Kyle Shanahan, and maybe this is something that clicked when McCaffrey was in there, like Mitchell can catch the ball, Mason can catch the ball just fine, Juice can catch. Like, I hope they keep throwing the ball to running backs, even if McCaffrey does get hurt.
So I'm looking at just the last year's schedule. And we know that Christian McCaffrey was traded, I want to say, after the Atlanta game. And they had McCaffrey for Kansas City, LA, a bunch of the next games. There's a string of games here, where is it? Los Angeles, Arizona, and New Orleans, where Elijah Mitchell was your leading rusher in each of those games. And also the leading rusher in the last game, week 18, which I think that was kind of by design. I think they started to rest Christian McCaffrey later in that game. But outside of that, I mean, again, you see 3 straight games where Elijah Mitchell, that's your leading rusher. So when you see these numbers and you're like, hey, it's not that much of a difference. I think they ideally would like to have some type of share. I know I said earlier, Kyle, he'll run his guys into the dirt. But that is one thing I kind of forgot that happened, where Elijah Mitchell was getting a decent amount of carries until he just wasn't healthy again. And then, you stopped seeing him. But if he's healthy, there's a chance that in several of these games, he gets more carries than Christian McCaffrey. Right.
Like maybe a little bit of a closer role. We could see that with Jordan Mason a little bit too, even if whether or not Mitchell is healthy, because Jordan Mason looked like he was pretty good in that role as a rookie last year. And both those guys rushed for 6 yards per carry. So like it's fine. You got the lead. Pound the rock with let some of these other guys take those heavy hits and not McCaffrey in those situations. So I hope they do utilize McCaffrey to the fullest in the passing game and give him some help running the football in early downs, late in games if you have a lead, all those types of situations that they could help save Christian McCaffrey. And I know Kyle doesn't always want to do it that way, but I hope they do it. One thing I totally disagree with here with these projections, they have Ty Davis Price getting more carries and yards than Jordan Mason. They don't really have much of a role left for either one of those players after giving all of it to the first two backs in McCaffrey and Mitchell. Only 32 carries for Davis and only 14 on the season for Jordan Mason. I mean, way over that on Jordan Mason. I would be shocked if Jordan Mason isn't one of the top 3 rushers for the 49ers this season.
Elijah Mitchell only played in 5 games last year. It's not ideal. So projecting him to play 14 after his rookie year played 11 games and still almost ran for 1,000 yards. Then next year played 5. So he's played 16 games out of potential, 34?
Yeah, so he barely played 14 games in 2 seasons so far.
Yeah. And they're saying he's going to play 14 this year. If he does, that would be excellent for the 49ers. But
the per game numbers, the per carry numbers, nice. But the games played numbers, not great for Elijah Mitchell to start his career, and already banged up in the spring practices, or at least being held back in the spring practices. Big year for Jordan Mason. I'm all about Jordan Mason. All right, we got to move on here. Next, more with the pass catchers and the receiving yards for tight ends and wide receivers. Thanks again, everybody, for making Locked On 49ers your first listen every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Make sure you are subscribed up on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcasts. So, who's wide receiver 1 for the 49ers, Croc? It's still Deebo Samuel, according to ESPN's projections by Mike Clay, but not by a lot. Just edging out Brandon Aiyuk, 888 yards to 823 yards. A few extra receptions, though, for Aiyuk. So 3 more catches for Aiyuk than Deebo, 65 to 62 there. So Deebo Samuel receiving 62 catches for 888 yards, and Brandon Aiyuk 65 catches on 101 targets and 823 receiving yards, 5 receiving touchdowns each for those 2 receivers. So that getting who's wide receiver 1? Deebo has the 243 more rushing yards projected here, so some wide back usage as well. So, still the number 1 weapon yardage wise, but we saw it last year, and I know Deebo sounds more motivated, but who knows? Maybe this is the year that Brandon Aiyuk starts to look a little bit more like wide receiver 1, Croc.
It reminds me of my coach in college. Shout out to Coach Dykes, who said we were student athletes. And the way that he would say that was, you are a student athlete. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can see when I say student, even though you say it first, you hold up the number 2. Then when he says athlete, even though he says the second, he holds up number 1, and that kind of is what it feels like with the 49ers. Where you ask who's the wide receiver 1, Brandon Aiyuk has more receptions and more targets as well. So you would assume like, okay, that's the guy that they're going through. But still, overall, is the guy that's projected to have more production, whether it's yards, the touchdowns are the same, but Deebo Samuel. And I feel like part of that is just the way that you get the ball in Deebo Samuel's hands. Just screenplay, dump off, things out the backfield, a bunch of different ways. So I think even though you'll say Brandon Aiyuk is wide receiver 1, the target share might still lean more towards Deebo Samuel.
I think Deebo's going to get the ball more.
Yeah.
Period. And they'll look for ways to get him the ball. My big question here is, and their receiving yards could end up being pretty similar. I don't disagree there. But 15 games for Brandon Aiyuk, only 823 yards, kind of a step back for him.
Definitely a step back. And I think that also kind of, with Deebo playing as many games as he's playing there, I guess that's similar to last year as well. That'd be tough, especially for him. And it's kind of essentially kind of a contract year type thing that he's going into. Like, how much is he going to get paid on the new contract? That's the thing I'm looking at, and it's like, okay, 800 yards.
Contract.
And we know how important he is to the 49ers, but, just cashing in and getting a payday. Was it baseball that they have the arbitration thing?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Where they'll just point out all, why they don't want to pay you. And what will 49ers say about Brandon Aiyuk? Where it's like, we only want to give you, $13 million a year. And it's like, man, we know that he's more of a $20 million a year guy, but that's just not what his usage will be with the 49ers.
And you have his numbers from, I don't have his numbers from last year up. I just have the projections up. So they've got him 4.3 catches per game here. If he's got 65 catches in 15 games for Brandon Aiyuk. And that's clearly not wide receiver one usage. So even if you project him to become that, it'd be hard to pay him. So
1,000 yards last year, 1,015 yards.
And he played every game?
Yeah.
Okay. 1,015 was it?
Yes.
Okay.
And the way while you're doing the math, the way that we
how many receptions?
78.
Okay. Yeah, so 4.5. So just 0.2 more perceptions or 0.2 more receptions per game last year than he's projected here.
And the way that we talk about him, it's that he's solidified wide receiver one ability, one of the best wide receivers twos in the league. The fantasy community is looking at him that way. We talk about him that way. But Kyle, obviously he wants to run his offense works, etc. But it almost feels like Aiyuk will be the odd man out when it comes to production. And that doesn't mean that the 49ers will win more or less games with his production. They'll do just as well as they did last year. But specifically for him and what he is capable of doing, I think that this offense in particular doesn't do him justice. I think elsewhere, he's a 1,300 yard receiver.
It's hard to see. The more I think about it, it's hard for me to see Brandon Aiyuk coming back and signing a deal next offseason with the 49ers. Now they have the 5th-year option for him, but they might get phone calls that they can't refuse, basically, because they'll hear from Aiyuk's agent that, whatever, we're not going to sign. Because if he balls out and goes crazy, like let's say Deebo gets hurt or Deebo takes a backseat to Aiyuk and Aiyuk's the man and he's, then he earns himself a huge contract, even more than Deebo got. And I don't know if 49ers can afford to pay that with Deebo. And on the other hand, if he has a year that's kind of like projected here, he will say, I need to go somewhere where I can get more targets. So I'm going to request a trade.
Well, look at this.
So even if it would be like a bargain for the 49ers, Aiyuk's not going to sign that contract. He's going to say, I could be number one somewhere else and get way more money, way more targets, way more production.
All right, so look at this. The Las Vegas game, Deebo didn't play in that game. Aiyuk, 9 catches on 12 targets, 100 yards. All right, the very next week, I'm assuming Deebo Samuel is back against Arizona. 4 receptions on 5 targets, 59 yards, right? Like, not earth-shattering. Then you get into the playoffs. Seattle game, 3 catches, but for 73 yards. So one of those obviously was a big gain, but 3 receptions. It's like, well, why not the same looks as other guys? And again, I understand why, but explain that to his agent.
Right, like 2 catches and 2 touchdowns.
Yeah, Dallas game, 2 receptions. Is like, explain that to his agent.
Well, if he goes, who's the next man up? It's going to be Juwan Jennings. Are you going to sign both those guys? Because he's going to be a free agent as well. Juwan Jennings projected to catch 30 passes for 371 yards and 2 touchdowns.
Well, Danny Gray. So let's say in a perfect world, it would be the guy that, and again, you only spend a late 3rd round, dang near a 4th round pick on Danny Gray. Matter of fact, I think he was maybe the last pick in the 3rd round. So it's not like you invested a whole lot, but ideally you would hope to see him do better than this 6 receptions that he's projected to have.
Yeah, big year for Danny Gray. He's got to prove that he's worthy of playing time and worthy of getting the ball thrown his way a lot more than just, a handful of snaps over the course of the season. Big year for him. Yeah, 6 for 71. I'll take the over on that. But again, he wouldn't be the first guy where it's just like, he's the 5th receiver again, and then they bring in other guys and he kind of washes it around the league. Big, huge year for Danny Gray, year 2.
I do have a question for you. So we see this in the chat. Team's game plan for Deebo, which means coverage, double teams, and shades towards Deebo, which also hindered his numbers. Are teams doubling Deebo?
They are rolling people towards him for sure.
Okay.
I think with Deebo, it's not like a true double team necessarily. It's not like, I'm trying to think of someone like DK Metcalf. You put a man on him and then you kind of have somebody over the top. kind of bracket or
Justin Jefferson.
Right, Justin Jefferson. You have a lot of attention going his way for Deebo, and I saw the same thing with Christian McCaffrey. It's like in team meetings, they're like 19 is getting the ball. We're gonna go. We're gonna get after him. So it's like they're rolling people his way. Kyle tries to make it difficult. Christian McCaffrey's it was even maybe even more so when Christian McCaffrey showed up. It was the same way last year. So the teams just are focused on stopping those guys and they're less worried. So that would probably be that arbitration argument for the 49ers. So like, well, no, you're never getting doubled. Nobody's worried about you, Brandon. You have the easiest job in the NFL because there's 3 deep coverage and everyone's focused on number 23 and everyone's focused on number 19. That would probably be their argument to Brandon Aiyuk. It's like, okay, you want to be the big man on campus? You want to be wide receiver 1 and go somewhere and have all the attention on you? Have fun. That would be like the tough conversation to have with him.
And if I'm him, I'm saying, yes.
Yep. Okay, I'll take that bet.
Because another team can do other things to free him up, right? Motion him more, motion him to a tight split. Have him run drags across the formation, things that are going to free him up, pick routes for him, which the 49ers don't do that. They run their offense and, hey, go out there and win. And maybe on this rep, you'll get the ball.
Now, I would like to, in a perfect world for me, I would like to see those. You start at quarterback and the 438 attempts, and then you add in the other attempts, so 500 attempts. I would just say, let's take that slider up 100 more. Like, let's go 600. Let's throw the stinking football to McCaffrey, to Deebo, to Aiyuk, and to George stinking Kittle. Croc projected for 62 receptions, 726 yards, 5 touchdowns. I want 10 targets a game for George Kittle, man. But I also want 10 targets a game for Deebo. And I also want 7 targets a game for Aiyuk. And I also want a bunch of targets for Christian McCaffrey. And so unless it's a higher volume offense than it's ever been, you're just not going to get that. In some games, you might get that for some of these guys. But I wonder if Kyle might throw the ball more this year.
No.
So it's hard to take the over on Kittle's 62 for 726 yards.
Yeah. I think Kyle Shanahan runs to set up his looks for the throws. So as long as his mindset is that, which it works, right? And I think a lot of people are assuming, oh, he just wants to run the ball. I think he wants to run and set up the throws, but it's very calculated, as opposed to a team that just comes out and they're just going to fire the ball all around because they believe in just throwing the ball. You move faster than running it. Perfect example, Kansas City Chiefs. I don't think the Kansas City Chiefs really care to run the ball. Like they don't care.
They run the ball just to show a little balance, just to keep it on your mind, and to help out a little bit in the passing game. But Kyle is a running back centric offense. It's not a quarterback centric offense. If he gets a better quarterback, might it be more that way? It was a little bit more like that in Atlanta. I would have to look at the numbers again.
I looked at them. It was heavy Julio, but it wasn't too crazy.
I mean, certainly Matt Ryan threw for more yards than any Kyle quarterback in San Francisco.
Yeah, but remember, Schaub, you got to go back to Houston too. Schaub threw for a bunch of yards. I think the running back was Slayton, maybe, and then obviously like Aaron Foster, but I don't even know if that was Kyle Shanahan's guy with Foster.
Steve Slayton, one of those out of nowhere Shanahan backs, man. It goes all the way back to Mike in Denver, and you can always find him. All right, good stuff. Those are projections from ESPN's Mike Clay on your 2023 San Francisco 49ers. Let us know what you think at BD Peacock, at Eric_Crocker. Subscribe up on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcast. Croc and I back tomorrow, right here, Locked On 49ers.
Subscribe to this video.